Five great truths we've been preaching out of 1 Corinthians. This is our second journey through Corinthians here at Bayside. We did the first half of the book, and then we came back after Christmas for this, the five great truths of the last five chapters. And I want to go back to chapter 1. I want to go all the way back to chapter 1. It's important that we not forget the aim of this book, the goal of this book, the start of this book. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 10, Paul gives us his mission, his theme for what he's trying to accomplish. And as we conclude the book, I want to make sure that we actually do what Paul set out to do in the beginning. He says, I appeal to you, brothers and sisters, in the name or the authority of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you all agree with one another. They had gotten off track into camps. Celebrity Christianity was emerging in from them, and they forgot to get their focus exclusively on Jesus and unified together. It's like they got all fighting, and there was fighting about who was behind Apollos and who was for Paul and who wanted a mask mandate and who didn't want a mask mandate. Oh, wait, that was not them. I took a speech class in high school, and this teacher, great teacher, Bob Picard, all those years ago, and I still remember the first thing he taught. The first thing he taught in the speech class was this: you have to nail the intro, and you have to nail the conclusion. Because if you don't get their attention and you don't get them acting on what you said, nothing you said in the middle counts. You gotta have, how many have heard this speech advice, by the way? You gotta kill the intro and you gotta kill the conclusion. And 35 years of preaching, I've never forgot this. Matter of fact, the very first time I spoke was in that class. And I remember I spoke on the theme, is Jesus still relevant? I was a brand new Christian. Really, I knew nothing about nothing, but I wanted to speak on the theme, is Jesus still relevant? I thought, how could I do an intro that would just grab the whole class and get an A? And I thought about it, and I got this idea. And here was the idea. The day of the speech, the gal that was talking before me, she finished. She said, all right, you can sit down. Curt, it's your turn. I said, just a second, I need to get organized so no one is paying attention. And I got like 4 3-ring binders in my left arm, and I got 4 big, huge textbooks in my right arm. And I had all these 3x5 cards and pencils and pens. And I brought them up to the music stand, because you gotta have a music stand in speech class, right? And I put them all on the music stand. Of course, the weight of it was too much, and the music stand fell over, the huge crash, and the books flew over them. And I went, Jesus Christ is the only major religious figure who's also a cuss word. See what I did there? You see what I did there? See, it's important that when we study the end, we don't forget the beginning. What's the beginning? Paul wants them to get their eyes back on Christ, and Paul wants them to be unified. How does he do that? Let's review a little bit of the context here and some of the great truths. The critical question is, does the end of the book really matter? Yes, it matters, because the end of the book is critical to actually doing the beginning of the book. Why does the end of the book matter? Paul's care for others is proof of his theology. The Apostle Paul spends the end of the book mostly talking about how we should behave with each other and how we should treat certain people in the 1 Corinthian church. And the thing about it is, we're tempted to read these passages, I'll get to them in a second, and kind of skip over them. They're not as important as that powerful 1 Corinthians 13, love never fails, love is kind, that's all so poetic. We get to these verses, they seem more practical to us, and we think, oh, that's not force, and nothing could be farther from the truth. The reason that chapter 16 is so important is because how Paul treats people, the pattern Paul gets into in his behavior with others, proves that the theology in chapter 1 through 15 works. The truth works. And how it's met out in chapter 16 is the proof of that. All right, let's review really quick. What have we been teaching? Number 1, on chapter 12, 6 weeks ago, we taught about your gifts matter. Your gifts matter, your gifts matter, your gifts matter. So here at Bayside, we're not a sit in the stands church. This is only a little bit of what we do. And I want to encourage you, the biggest cost that we've paid coming out of COVID has not been financial. Our budget, I'll talk about our budget in a minute. Our budget's been pretty good. There's a budget report actually in your program too. You know what the biggest cost for us is? We've lost teammates. We've lost volunteers. People went into isolation, they stopped volunteering, and they didn't get back into volunteering. I want to tell you, when the church is filled with people that get out of the stands and into the game, we start making so much more impact. If you're not signed to come to U-Lead, get signed to get to U-Lead. I said, Curt, I've not even volunteered yet. Still come to U-Lead, and we're going to tell you how to volunteer. My friend, when you've got Andrew Stanley doing comedy and Mark Clark preaching, you should come just for that. But the truth of the matter is, you should come because your gifts matter. Second lesson that we taught is everything requires love. You could be absolutely right, but if you don't have love, nothing you do or say is going to matter in the long run. You're going to be exposed as a phony. But with love, even if you have mistakes, you can have a powerful impact. The same is true with this. Edification always works. That's the lesson of chapter 14. What is edification? It means to build someone up. When you go and your aim is to build only your life, you're going to build no lives. But when your aim becomes not to get on a platform, but to be a platform for someone else, to build someone else up, your life becomes powerfully significant. And number 4 is this: you have a resurrection coming. My friend, when you wake up Monday morning and you're all groggy and tired because our legislature can't figure out that there's no science behind spring ahead and time clock change baloney, the plants will live. They get the same amount of sun whether we go to bed at 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock. Is anyone with me on this? We are torturing our children and our adults. That's so true. When you wake up on Monday morning and you feel groggy, I want you to say this to yourself: this is not all there is. This fleeting little life filled with brokenness and disappointment is not all there is. You have life for all eternity. And number 5, you know what number 5 is? Write this in. I'm not going to tell you right now. I'll tell you at the end of the sermon. Do you remember what I said about beginnings and ends? See what I just did there? Okay, let's keep going. 2 great questions to get back on track. The Apostle Paul wants them to get back on track. So he gives them these 2 great questions. And one is about your outlook, and the other one is about your relationships. What's the one about your outlook? Here it is. First of all, number 1, how should we unleash compassion? The Apostle Paul ends this great book by getting them to be outward focused and compassion focused for others, and a particular group, I'll explain this in a second, that they would naturally, culturally not have any affinity for or want to unleash compassion in. So how do I explain this? What's the most spiritual thing we do when we gather? When we gather, what do you think the most significantly spiritual thing we do is? I'd love to survey new people and see what they think about this. Some people say it's worship. I love the worship. I come to Bayside for the worship. I love Corbin. I love Chloe. I love the way they sing. I love Thrive Worship. I love Lincoln Brewster. I love all that. I'm all in. And I get goosebumps, and at least twice a service, I just lift my hands up and I hit someone in the face. I mean, I'm in. And you'd be right. That is a pretty spiritual thing to do. Worship is, and I hope all of you grow in worship. Some of you are like, well, I don't sing. I sound horrible. It says make a beautiful noise unto the Lord. I don't got that gift. So I love the sermon, man. I love thinking about theology. I love taking the notes. I love it even when Curt mispronounces all the Greek words. I love it. I love it. I love it. And I like the theology. And some of you probably wouldn't admit this, but it's really true. You like the worship and you like the teaching, but what you really love is the chit chat before and after service. And by the way, that's very spiritual. Connecting, fellowship, the Bible calls it. Having laughter with each other. I want to encourage some of you need to grow in that area. Some of you, you're like, I love worship. I love the teaching. And the second the worship and teaching's over, you're like pushing people in the parking lot down to get to your car. I'm going to win the Christian Grand Prix. I got a secret way to get out of the parking lot. Here's one that almost no one would vote for, but I think it is the most spiritual thing, or one of the most spiritual things we do. And it's an ancient thing. We've been doing this thing, this passage proves, we've been doing this as early as we started doing Christian worship. As early as we started doing Christian teaching, this was a part of Christian gatherings. You know what it is? Receiving the offering. Taking the offering. Why is it the most spiritual thing? Because you can fake worship, you can fake learning, but when you hand your finances over, there's no faking about it. Something happens in you. Even if you're not doing it sincerely, the act of doing it causes you to learn and lean into trusting God. From the very beginning of Christianity. You say, Curt, why do we take second offerings around here? Because we refuse to apologize for asking some of the most wealthy people on the earth at the wealthiest time in the history of the earth. And by wealth, I'm not talking extravagance. I'm not talking you're living in a gated community over there. Maybe you are, maybe you're not. I'm talking you have access to a car. You have a refrigerator. Some of the most wealthy people in the history of humankind to be generous to the hurting. Why do we take an offering for Ukraine? I'll tell you why we take an offering for Ukraine. Because the believers in Ukraine are our brothers and sisters. And when they're hurting, we hurt. When we rejoice, they rejoice. When they mourn, we mourn with them. And so it's not in the budget. We didn't know if we could afford it. We didn't know how it would impact the other giving. But we said, you guys give, and you gave $150,000 to $160,000. Look at this. Let's look at the passage. Now about the collection for the Lord's people. Do what I told the Galatian churches to do. On the first day of every week, each of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with your income, saving it up so that when I come, no collections will have to be made. Then when I arrive, I will give letters of instruction to the men you approve and send them with your gift to Jerusalem. Circle that word, Jerusalem. It's very important where this offering's going to. It seems advisable for me to go also. They will accompany me. Paul does something that he does often when he writes. He does this in Romans. He does this in Galatians. He does this in Ephesians. Every once in a while, he'll put 3 sentences together. And in those 3 sentences, there's more instruction, more content if we're looking at it than some people put in 9 volumes of their writings. This is a perfect example. It's just dense instruction here. I'm going to break this down for you, and we're going to see how the Apostle Paul teaches on taking and receiving offerings. Now, here's the thing. The Bible is often not very specific when it comes to order of worship. There's very little liturgy. And the reason for that is because how Christians meet, there's a wide variety of ways that Christians can meet that is pleasing to the Lord. There's different subcultures, and there's different ages and times and places. That's why we don't meet exactly in this room the way our kids are meeting. So the Bible doesn't prescribe this very often. But when the Bible does tell us how to do something like this, we ought to pay attention. And listen to Paul here. He's a genius on this. First of all, he says on the first day. That means that it was Sunday morning. Their first day of the week was Sunday morning. In other words, an offering should be a regular part of the Christian worship. Why do we stick the offering in the middle of the singing? Because the offering is worship. Not all worship is singing. Some worship is trusting. Amen. And the offering is a moment where we express our trust and gratitude to God. Of every week. It should be consistent. This isn't a special thing we do. It isn't an occasional thing we do. Every single week, we express worship to God by receiving offerings. Each one of you should be cooperative. One of the things that I have learned is that the most powerful thing the church can do is when the church all does it. You see, some people are like, you know what? I'll wait a little while before I start giving because I'm just trying to get my on track. And another person says, you know what? I'm doing really well right now, but I got this one other goal, and then I'll do this there. And sometimes we don't realize that really only 15 or 20% of our church is actually paying for everything. You think that's the 15 or 20% that are very wealthy? It's really not. It's across the board. Some people with very little means are a part of that 15%. And some people with a lot of means are a part of that 15%. But they're the ones that have actually gotten in the game. And everyone else is kind of going, they can do it without me. They don't really need me. Look at how well they've done so far. I want to tell you, my friend, what would happen if we all gave? I'll tell you what would happen. The Lord's influence and lives changed, would increase dramatically. If everyone just did this, what God asked them to do. What God asked them to do. It's a worship, it's consistent, it's cooperative, it's financial. Should set aside a sum of money. Some people say, well, I'll serve in the kids' building and other people can give. No, if you're just serving and not giving, you're missing out. And if you're just giving and not serving, you're also missing out. In keeping with his income, it's proportionate. God is not asking for a number from you. He's asking for a percentage. He's asking you to grow and trust financially. The person that is of great means should be giving much more than the person that's of little means. Some of you, if you gave a little amount, it would be a true sacrifice. Some of you have given a large amount and it's not a sacrifice yet. God wants you to give proportionate in his personal calling to you. Saving it up. In other words, it should be planned. If you look at these verses, there's a lot of planning that goes on here. Paul says, I don't want to spend time doing this when I get with you. I want to spend time teaching you and talking with you, so please get it organized and planned ahead of time. And then the men you approve. In other words, it should be leaders that are operating in integrity. This last week, Andrew and I were in our FOT meeting, or 2 weeks ago, which is our financial operations team. They look at the health of the finances of Bayside. There's a report in your bulletin. We come out with that every once in a while. And here's one of the things. The auditor got on a Zoom call and gave us his report of our independent audit. And this is what he said. I'll sum up the whole audit. He spent about an hour going through everything with us. And his whole audit was, you guys are doing amazing. Now, there's 3 reasons why we're doing amazing. Number 1, we've held expenses down during COVID. We were cautious. Number 2, we have a finance department that is awesome. That is awesome. Insert applause here, you guys. I mean, honestly, if you knew these people, they are awesome. And the 3rd reason is this. God has been very generous to you, and you've been faithful in that generosity. Thank you for receiving God's blessing and blessing others. That's why. Let's keep that up. Someone give me an amen. Let's keep that up. But one of the big reasons is because that finance team we have operates with such great integrity. And then lastly, your gift to Jerusalem. Now, I want you to think about this. The Corinthian church is primarily made of who? Gentiles. There's a small Jewish group in the Corinthian church, but it's a Gentile city, okay? The Jerusalem church is primarily made of what? Jews in Jerusalem. Which church has been persecuted the most? The Jerusalem church. They were persecuted first. Their homes were taken. Their businesses were destroyed. Many Christians were displaced. Some Christians were killed. Some Christians were jailed. So the Jerusalem church has taken the biggest hit financially and emotionally. The Apostle Paul is saying this. Listen, we're Gentiles, they're Jews, but when they hurt, we hurt. They are us. See, he's teaching them to unleash compassion. To not just think, how are we doing here in Corinth? This is why we take second offerings all the time around here. This is why we say we're going to take a second offering so every kid can go to camp. This is why we're going to take a second offering so the fire victims actually have clothes and they have diapers if they're moms, and they have the food that they need and shelter they need, because when the church unleashes compassion, the cause of Christ gets more influence and more life change happens. Paul's trying to teach them. They're Jews, we're Gentiles, we're the family of God. Then there's a secondary reason. This is even more powerful. Paul and Peter are having a theological dispute at this moment. Paul goes to the apostles in Jerusalem and he says, listen, don't make the Gentiles do all the Jewish stuff. Just let them be Christians. And they agree. They actually agree on that. But later on, Peter backs off from that position and he starts treating Gentile believers a little differently. And Paul confronts him on it and says, bro, this is hypocritical. You guys said, and what are you doing? How come you won't eat with them? And so Paul and Peter are having a little conflict. And Paul, his response to the conflict theologically he's having with Peter is to bless Peter, to take an offering for Peter's church. What would happen if everyone who opposed Christianity, we just poured out blessings on them? I tell you what happened, church would grow. Because we'd have our eyes on Jesus and we'd be a lot more unified. Paul wants him to unleash compassion. I live with a person who understands this. We're going to teach another series right after this, starting next week, called The Blessed Life. We're just going to do it for 3 weeks. And I live with a person who understands the blessed life. By the way, the blessed life, it's not what you think. What is the blessed life? How do you get into a life that's blessed? My wife loves to go secondhand shopping or vintage clothes shopping. What does a vintage clothes shopping mean? It means that you go to the Goodwill near Granite Bay. That's what that means. If you go to any other Goodwill, it's just secondhand shopping. But the Goodwill, and she found, a couple years ago, she found this vintage, beautiful, very expensive blue dress coat. And it's floor length, and it's all the materials and the label, I don't know, Nordstrom, Macy, whatever, but it was some designer, and it was like $700-800 coat. And she found this coat for like $25. She brought it home. The girls were going crazy. And she only wore it a couple times a year. She would wear it at Christmas, special Christmas party, special dinner. Everyone who ever saw her, and it was like, that's amazing. She'd tell him the whole story. Taro of Makuni saw him once, and he wanted the jacket. And I think he wanted to make pants out of it. And that's funny if you know Taro. And so the point about it is, she wore this for about 4 or 5 years. And one time she was at a Christmas party, and one of our young staff members were there. And the young staff member was like, that's an incredible coat. And Kelly told her the whole story. She says, man, I wish I had a coat like that. And Kelly took the coat off and gave it to her. Just, right there, just gave it to her. Yeah, it's your coat. So we're walking to the car, and I'm freezing. Because you know who's wearing my coat now, right? And I said, why did you do that? And she said, oh, because God's gonna bless me. God's gonna bless me. Now, let me teach. Do we give to get? Unless you're Kelly Harlow, man, she does. Apparently, she's the one person that works for. I mean, she doesn't give to get, but she's just learning. I've sat back and watched her for 35 years. She's like, God's gonna bless me. A couple weeks ago, she comes home. She's got the identical coat for $25. This is the second coat like that, the identical. Now she has two. She said, I gave one away, now I own two. Are you saying to me, Curt, that if I'll give away more stuff, God will give me more stuff? If you're Kelly Harlow, yes, I guess. Now, what I'm really saying is there's a blessed life. We don't give to get, but there's a blessed life out there. And some of you, you've touched it. Some of you, it's touched you. But I want to encourage you, what does it mean to live in it? To walk in it? That's what we're going to study the next 3 weeks. All right, let's move on. I only got a few more minutes left. How should we love our family well? So the Apostle Paul gets to the end of this great book and he says, I want you to take an offering. That's unleashing compassion. Then secondly, he goes, I want you to treat a bunch of people correctly. And he goes through the list. Get ready. I'm going to mispronounce at least 3 of these Greek names. Let's go ahead and go through the passage. He says, when Timothy comes, see to it that he has nothing to fear while he is with you. For he is carrying on the work of the Lord just as I am. No one then should treat him with contempt. All right. Why is the Apostle Paul worried about them treating him with contempt? Why is he worried about Timothy fearing? Why does he say Timothy's gonna do the gospel just the way I'm doing the gospel? Here's the reason. Timothy's gonna come and bring correction to them. And they know it. See, earlier on, he said, I'm sending Timothy to you to help you with this. What Paul's saying in this letter, Timothy's gonna say in person, and they know it. We all know when someone's gonna bring correction into our life, right? You have that one friend, and they look at you and go, hey, can we talk? And you're like, okay, great, what did I do? I had this friend, Ron Urkus, whenever he'd do this to me, he'd say, hey, can we sit down and talk? And I go, oh, great. And then we'd sit down, and he'd go, okay, I like this about you, and I like this. And if he started going in through that list of everything he liked about me, I knew I was gonna get smacked right in the nose. Sure enough, he'd go through like 5 things he likes about me. He goes, but I have to ask you, what about this? And it would just be like, poof, and it would be just from God. And I'd feel all convicted. And I'd be like, you're right. And then he'd go, I like this and I like this. And he would finish with 4 things he liked about me. I called it the encouragement sandwich. You know, the encouragement, punch in the face. Right? This is what Timothy's coming to do. He's coming to give him some correction. Okay, let's look at the next one. Now, about our brother Apollos. I strongly urged him to go to you with the brothers. He was quite unwilling to go now, but he will go when he has the opportunity. Why is Apollos unwilling to go? Well, most theologians, most historians theorize that Apollos is actually disgusted with what the Corinthians have done to him. Do you remember this? If you were around here for these sermons, they were dividing into camps. Some were for Apollos, some were for Christ, and some were for Paul. And Apollos is like, I actually don't want to be a celebrity pastor. I don't want you to do that. I want your focus to be completely on Jesus. And most people believe that Apollos didn't return for like 7 or 8 years, and some believe he never went back. So Paul's going, no, you got to make it right with Apollos. All right, then the last ones. Here's where the mispronunciations come. Be on your guard, stand firm in the faith, be courageous, be strong. Do everything in love. Man, I wish we'd all got this one tattooed on our left bicep right before COVID. If you want an instructional verse for handling the next pandemic, be on your guard, stand firm in the faith, be courageous, be strong, but do everything in love. Man, I met some very courageous people during this last season, but they didn't always do it in love. I've even heard some pastors say some courageous things, not very much in love. And I've met some people that were really, really loving, but maybe not as courageous, maybe not as faithful as they should have been. Did you have someone disappoint you during this last season? What should you do? Forgive them. Some things are very powerful. Courage is very powerful. Love is very powerful. You know what's even more powerful than courage and love? Courageous love. Saying, I'm standing my ground. I'm keeping my guard. I'm not moving my faith, but I'm going to do it with grace and forgiveness. I'm going to extend the acceptance to you that Christ extended to me. I'm going to actually let God handle your sin. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to forgive as I've been forgiven. You know the household of Stephanas were the first converts in Achaia, and they have devoted themselves to the service of the Lord's people. I urge you, brothers and sisters, to submit to such people and to everyone who joins in the work and labors at it. What is he doing here? He's saying, I want you to follow this guy's example. This is really important. How many have ever heard that the Bible has been changed over the years? Anyone hear this argument? So a lot of times people will say, yeah, you know, the Christianity that they have is not the Christianity that we have. We've changed it. Everyone changed it. The Romans changed it and stuff. This is actually one of those verses that proves that that's not true. The Apostle Paul was very committed to a thing called the rule of faith. The early believers and the early Christian fathers, very committed to this thing. They wrote about it. They talked about it. And what it was is they said, we're going to find examples of people who have authentic Christianity, and we're going to follow those examples so we don't lose authentic Christianity. When Apostle Paul says, follow me as I follow Christ, this is the rule of faith. He's not saying, I'm so great, I'm the better than you. No, he's saying the apostles, the people that hung around with Jesus, said, I have the authentic faith. Therefore, to keep the authentic faith, follow me. And it's the same thing he's doing here with Stephanas. He's like, Stephanas has got it. Follow him, submit to him. And then he goes on with some of his friends. I was glad when Stephanas, Fortunatus, and Achaicus arrived. I apologize to all Greek-speaking people for the way I said those three names, because they have supplied what was lacking from you. In other words, what you were not faithful in doing, they were faithful in, for they refreshed my spirit and yours also. Such men deserve recognition. I love this. The most powerful apostle, the most successful missionary ever. And what's he doing? He's lifting other leaders up. These are the guys. These are the people. Basically what the Apostle Paul does here at the end is he shows that world-class theology means world-class relationships. World-class truth, world-class Christianity means world-class relationships. There's 4 summary ideas, and I'm gonna go through them faster. We love family well when we. Here's the 4 things that I want you to do at work on Monday morning. The 4 things I want you to do with your spouse. The 4 things I want you to do with your kids. The 4 things I want you to do with your parents. The 4 things I want you to do with your roommate and your best friends. Here they are. Timothy represents this: receive difficult feedback. What would happen if you received difficult feedback? I tell you what would happen. You would grow. You would have a breakthrough. Where you're stuck now, you would no longer be stuck. See, you can't just be open to feedback, and you certainly are not going to grow if you're closed to feedback. You got to seek feedback. You got to say, yes, please tell me. What do I need to know? All of us have blind spots. I can't see all of me ever. And so I need difficult feedback. Even difficult feedback that is uncomfortable to hear. Apollos represents this: the restoring of damaged relationships. Earlier, when I was talking about people that disappointed you, who did you think of? That's who I want you to call this afternoon. And don't call and do that passive aggressive thing where you go, listen, by the way, I'm calling because I'm very spiritual and I've forgiven you. You're forgiven. No, call them and tell them you love them. Call them and tell them you miss them. Call them and just talk about sports. Just call them and say, man, my pastor's so depressed about Russell Wilson. Just talk about that. 6 of you got that, and I'm proud of you. Just call them. What's Paul saying? He's saying, you Corinthians, one of the best gifts you ever received was Apollos, and then you made it into this sick competition. Stop it. Go make it right. Go make it right. Stephanus, he represents recognizing the devoted, giving honor, complimenting people, lifting people up. Who needs an encouraging word for you? I want you to become a braggart. Just be a bragger. I want you to brag and brag and brag and brag, but don't brag about yourself. Don't name drop. Don't actually worry about your status. Go brag on someone else. Find an underdog. Find someone a little bit invisible. Find someone underappreciated, and you become their champion, and watch as loyalty to you will grow. Because people will be loyal to someone they know that'll lift them up. And the final one is this. These last 2 men represent refreshing the discouraged. You see, our problem is we run into discouraged people, we run into tired people, we run into fatigued people, and we're worried that if we try to refresh them and encourage them, we'll become more fatigued. But that's not the way it works. It's not the way it works. Why, have you ever asked this question? It was here a couple weeks ago. Why is Bob Goff always so happy? He's an old man now. He should be grumpy. Why is he up there? He's like, hey, everyone, hey. That's pretty good. It's pretty good, don't you think? Yeah, thank you. You know why he's so happy? Because he majors in making other people happy. He refreshes others. And here's the secret. When you become a refresher, you get refreshed. Stop worrying about your problems. That's the secret to getting over your problems, and start actually refreshing other people up. It's so beautiful. It's so wonderful when you know that you've lifted someone else up. Look at this list again. What would happen if you received difficult feedback? You'd get a breakthrough. What would happen if you healed damaged relationships? You'd have lower stress. What would happen if you recognized the devoted? People would be more loyal to you. And what would happen if you refreshed the discouraged? You yourself would get more joy in your life. I want you to get a breakthrough. I want you to have actual less stress. I want you to actually have more loyal friendships, and I want you to have a smile on your face. And you can do all that if you just learn the great truth of this chapter. You ready for it? Here it is. I told you I'd share it at the end. You ready? Here's the last great truth. How you love others will define your life. How you love others will define your life. How you love others will define your life. Listen, it's not going to be your title or your followers on social media or your bank account. I was asked to do this big memorial service for this Italian man, and he passed away during COVID, and they couldn't have the funeral for many months. So finally they said, we're going to just do something in the middle of Sacramento so all of his friends from the Bay Area can come this way, and his friends from Placer County can come this way, and we'll all just meet in there, and we're just going to have a big Italian meal, and then we're going to have an open mic, and anyone can say whatever they're going to say, and then Pastor Curt, you get up and have a few words and preach a little bit and close in prayer. And I was worried about this plan because I was like, man, will anyone say anything at just an open mic? If you have no agenda and just an open mic, man, did I underestimate the ability for Italian families to grab an open mic. I mean, this thing, they said, all right, open mic time. And the first guy gets up there and he tells his story and it's hilarious. And we just start laughing. Next thing I know, I'm crying. Then this lady gets up. She tells another story. We're crying and laughing and crying. Then the next person and the next person, one after another, just telling these amazing, hilarious. It was like a comedy show. I'd have bought tickets to it. But at the same time we were laughing, there would be these poignant, beautiful moments where we were just weeping and grieving and crying. And finally one guy got up there, he tells this hilarious story. He said, but you know, the thing is, that guy is the guy I really knew, Ron. That guy has more stories than all of us. He pointed at this little old man. Guy sat down, the little old man got up, took his walker, and just took forever. Finally got to that mic, he grabbed the mic, he said, yeah, I got more stories about Ron than all of you. But none of them make Ron look like a good guy, so I'm not gonna tell him today. He dropped the mic. And they all did what you just did. They laughed because they knew what he was really saying was, I loved him. And he loved me. This guy, he was a big deal in Republican politics here in the state, and he was a really, really successful business person. But no one talked about that. He got mentioned here and there, but the bulk of the stories were not his net worth, where he lived, what kind of car he drove. The stories were about the moment that he threw his arm around him during a tough time, or how he made him laugh, or the adventures they went on. The thing is, my friend, is at the end of his life, all they wanted to talk about is what a great friend he was. And that's what it's gonna be like at the end of your life. They're not gonna mention your followers. They're not gonna mention your house. They're gonna not mention your address. They're not gonna mention your bank account. They're gonna talk about how you treated other people. Because that's all your life will be judged by in the end. So how do I do that, Curt? How do I love people? Sometimes it's hard to love people, amen? Here's the only way. Here's the only way. If you want to be a person who loves others well, here's the only way. You have to receive the love of Christ for yourself. You have to realize that all of these things Christ has already done for you. When you let the love of Christ into your life, you'll always have love left over for another life, another person, even for those who don't deserve it, because not one of us deserve the love of Christ. Can I ask you to bow your head? I'm wondering, as every head is bowed and every eye is closed, if there's someone in this room that needs to receive the love of Christ for the first time. Or maybe you used to know the love of Christ, but you wandered far from him. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pray a simple prayer. It's a prayer of faith, of trust, of surrender. I'm gonna pray it out loud, you pray it in your heart. If you need to give your life over to the love of Christ, I want you to pray this prayer with me right now. Right where you're sitting, say, God, come into my life. Give me your love so that I can love others. Jesus, thank you for dying on the cross and paying the price for my sin. I accept that forgiveness. Now let me extend forgiveness to everyone around me. In short, today, God, this life you have given me, I give it fully back to you. And I ask that you would help me follow you every day and in every way. If you prayed that prayer with me, I want you to just keep your eyes closed, keep your head down, everyone. I'm not gonna bring you forward or do anything embarrassing. But if you prayed that prayer, I wanna pray a prayer over you that you'll walk into that you'll sustain that Christ will reveal his love to you more and more. If you prayed that prayer with me, just do this for me right now. Raise your hand and say, yes, Pastor Curt, pray for me. Pray for me, Pastor Curt. Put it up high just so I could see it. Keep it up for a second. Thank you. Father, I thank you for every hand that was raised, every decision that was made, whether it be a recommitment or a first time. I pray that you would shower them with your grace. They'd experience your love. They'd know your nearness. God, not just today, but God, each and every day. Father, speak to them, guide them, surround them with people that would help them lean into this prayer they just prayed. God, guide them every day in every way, and we ask it in Jesus' name. And everyone said,